Welcome to Not Just Money with your hosts, Doretta and Lee. This isn't your typical podcast about finances. It's a podcast about all the money conversations we aren't having, sometimes not even with ourselves. Join us on this journey of hard truths, lived experience, and the wisdom that comes from both. Because money is never just about money.
Hi, Lee. I hear you have some heavy-duty negotiations underway.
I do. For me personally, it's mortgage renewal time. Now, I'm not the only one. Approximately 1 to 1.5 million Canadian households are set to renew their mortgage in 2026. Now, if you combine that with 2025, I think it represents close to 60% of all Canadian mortgages.
Wow.
Yeah, it's a big number. So I'm
Yeah.
definitely not alone and not alone in dealing with this. Now, my 5-year variable mortgage, which if those of you who have had variable mortgages this year, it's been quite the ride, will be up in July. And I went with a bank, has already reached out because I'm in that 6-month window where they generally want you to renew with them. And it's a good habit to get into to do it early. And they want to sign you right away because sometimes the rates are less favorable, more favorable. It really depends. And you also generally get a discount if you renew earlier rather than later. And of course, they hope you will take their first offer and just renew on the spot because, as they will tell you, it is a 10-minute paperwork thing. And you know what most people do, right? It's a really easy thing to just check off your list.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that we did just renew with our bank. I don't think we even shopped around for mortgage. I think we just went for a bank. Although we would have done and checked what all the banks were doing to make sure that they were all in the same ballpark. And I know we paid less than the posted rate because they made a point of that. But mortgages have changed so much since the days that we were buying a house and paying off our mortgage. I actually looked it up and realized that we bought our first house in the year mortgage rates peaked, which was at over 20%. Just to give you an idea how insane it was. And the other difference was that there was nowhere near as many options and variables as there are today. There just weren't. You didn't have the option to, accelerated payments, all of that kind of stuff was much more restricted. So did they make you a good offer?
So in this business, when I mean business, I mean the financial literacy, financial education space. The reason I find it so fascinating and probably why both of us have stuck with it so long is you're always learning new things. And there are new things that I'm learning in this journey because the mortgage I'm renewing is not for my primary residence, but it is for rental property. Now, what's really interesting about this, and again, you sometimes learn the hard way, is that generally a rental property renewal tends to be, in the past, 0.25% higher. Because I guess the banks or whomever are saying, from a risk perspective, a renter is less likely to take care of their home as opposed to a real homeowner. Debatable, I think, unless you burn down the house. I think the value of the house is still there. So the rate I get is higher than what you would get for a principal residence. But 3-4 months ago, financial institutions overnight decided that they were just going to jack rental home mortgages by a significant amount.
Wow.
So I went on, and there's a lot of great websites. I used Rate Hub just to kind of take a look at the rates, and they're literally 0.5% higher than what's posted. So it was a little bit of a shock because I was not expecting it to be in a higher range and quite a bit higher than what my current rate is, just because this was during COVID. And even though I was at a variable rate, I had a bigger discount from Prime, which obviously is no longer the case with everything that's happening in the real estate market. So I was in for a bit of a shock when I did call back and talk to them about it. And so then I had to go and find better rates and then start the negotiating process.
Wow, that's really interesting. I know we had a rental property at one point back in the day. I would never do it again. I think you're very brave. I discovered I'm definitely not cut out to be a landlord.
Yeah, it definitely has its moments, I'm not gonna lie, but it's because I have a lot of relatives that live outside the country, and in case they wanna come back and they need somewhere to live, it's always nice to kinda have another, what do they call it? Pied à terre
Hmm.
idea where, because I don't think we could all live together anymore as as a family. I think in order in order to preserve familial ties, I think there needs to be some distance of separation.
Yeah. Yeah, I can relate. So, well, I can't wait to hear how the negotiations unfold. Knowing you as I do, I would not want to be on the other side of those negotiations with you. I expect you to drive a really hard bargain. But this is a really good opportunity, actually, for us to dive into the mortgage scene, especially as you said, the number of people who are renewing. And then, of course, well, house sales are really down. So first time mortgages are probably down this year. But as you go through the renegotiation phase, why don't we put ourselves into the shoes of someone who's looking to buy their first property and negotiate their first mortgage? So let's do a Q&A thing here because this is much newer and more recent for you. So let me pick your brains and let our listeners listen in to the process and the kinds of things that they really should be thinking about. Make sense?
Sure, let's
Okay.
do it.
So let's start with how much you can afford to borrow. Like, how do you figure out how much house you can actually afford?
Well, there's a number of factors, but the easiest way to go about that is to either go to your financial institution or a mortgage broker, and you go through an application process where they'll provide you with essentially a pre-approved amount, and that is based on a number of factors from your credit rating to your income to any debts you have, and so they come up with a number that you can afford. Now, side story to this, I can see you want to ask this question because you know what a terrible experience this was for me 5 years ago. When I got my pre-approval 5 years ago, I was shocked at the amount that they had given me. At the time, it was during COVID, so rates were like free at that point
Yeah.
um to borrow money. And they essentially approved me for double than what I was comfortable in holding as debt. And I went back and I said, there is no way I can service this amount of money if rates go up by more than 2%. There's just no way. Like, I would be up to my eyeballs in debt. And they're like, well, you passed all the tests, the rates are really low, so you'll be fine. Yeah, maybe at 1.2%, but then as we know, interest rates would skyrocket to like 5, 6%. Yeah, I would have had to like sell all my clothes and all my furniture and only maybe have lasted a couple of months if I had bought that much house. It was bananas.
Yeah.
Bananas.
I think that that is such an important lesson for everyone. Just because the bank says you can afford this does not mean you can afford this. And I think people take that as okay, that's my limit. That's the price point I should be looking at. I mean, I can tell you a very similar story and a kind of scary story. A friend of mine was helping her daughter to buy her first place. And when they went to the bank, and again, it was the same thing with the very large number. And the mortgage specialist basically said, don't worry about the size of your mortgage. Don't worry about paying down your mortgage. All you have to worry about is the equity that you have, and your equity will go up. I'm thinking, these are people who have never lived through property going down in value. And of course, we all know
Mhm.
property has gone down in value. I've been through 2 real estate busts. It was a very scary thing to think that a bank professional was saying that to somebody. Mortgage yourself to the hilt. You'll be fine. Don't look at the number. All you care about is the equity that you have.
But I do think it goes back to what you always say about being able to sleep at night,
Yeah.
right? Doesn't matter what investments you make, whether that's property or the stock market. If you're making a decision that is going to prevent you from sleeping soundly at night, that should be big red flag. And when I saw this number, I was telling my husband, I was like, there is no way we can afford that. Like, I would not sleep at night. I would be constantly concerned that if anything went wrong, we'd be broke
Yeah.
and we'd be house poor. Like,
Yep.
that's a real thing.
Yeah. I mean, it's one thing to go through the approval process, but do not take that number as your number. I think you have to calculate separately what you feel that you can afford reasonably.
And do your own math. Like, there's a lot of really great online calculators. You don't even have to do it yourself. You just put in the numbers and then figure out what monthly, weekly, bi-weekly payments work for you, and then play around with different interest rates in terms of, okay, well, what will it feel like at the current level? What will it feel like if I add 2%? And how do you feel about that if that becomes your monthly commitment?
Right.
Especially if you're on a variable, because then you're riding it out. And so that's going to be another thing that we'll talk about later is like, how do you make some of those decisions? And it's really about your risk tolerance and again, how you can mitigate the
Yeah.
stress of one of the largest purchases of your life.
Yeah. I think another thing people should think about in buying their first house or apartment is all of the money that you have to come up with. It's not just the down payment and figuring out your mortgage payments. There are a lot of other costs that kick in on closing. And maybe you just want to give a quick review of that, what they also have to be prepared to pay.
Yeah, so if you're a buyer and you're moving into a house, you probably want to do a home inspection. There's a cost to that, and that can range. And then, of course, once you close, there's all sorts of fees. There's the legal fees because you have to have a lawyer for that. There's land transfer tax, which can be very high depending on the municipality and the province you're buying. So you need to do your research. And of course, if you're a first time homeowner, there are discounts to those taxes, but in some, again, municipalities, there's a maximum to that. So you might not get a free pass, even if it is your first home. And if you're a couple buying a home, and one of you has already owned a home before, or at least within the last 3 years, I think it resets every 3 or 4 years of not owning a home, then you become like a first time homeowner. But if you had owned a home previous to that purchase, you actually lose your ability to save on some things like a land transfer tax. And then there's always adjustments that have to be made at closing. There's obviously the moving costs, all those things. It's quite a lot to consider. So do your research. Look it up online. Heck, ask ChatGPT. What are all the costs I need to consider when I'm buying a home?
Yeah. Good idea. Good idea. I think it's very important that you know what all those costs are going to be because they can be substantial. So I think that's the thing that people should remember. Check your municipality, what the rates are there because it varies. Okay, so once you've figured out how much you can really afford to borrow, who do you go to? Who lends mortgages? What do they require?
Yeah, so I mean at this point you generally get a sense of how much money a financial institution or a lender will provide you. And hopefully before then, you'll have asked a number of them to give you quotes. Because oftentimes, and this is why there's some benefits to working with a mortgage broker, they'll give you cashback incentives. So depending on the size of your mortgage, they'll say, okay, well, we're going to throw in, $4,000 or we'll cover your moving day expenses. So they like bring you a truck and buy you pizza. Like that's actually a thing. Super random. So it's really finding not only the best rate, but also where you can get these freebies. Like, who doesn't want an extra 5, 10 grand in their pocket to, again, pay for some of those extras that you may not have as much room to cover immediately. And so it's always a good idea to get those terms really clearly set out.
Okay. And how is it that they go about qualifying you? How do they assess risk and all of that kind of stuff? You mentioned pre-approval already. What is the kind of thing? What do you need to go to them armed with?
Yeah, so there's a number of things that they're going to ask you for. Obviously, they have to pull your credit report. Okay, so 5 years ago, this is a horror story. I think I still have mild PTSD from this. They pulled my credit report, but they didn't pull the full report. Okay, there's a distinction. So when you pull a report, they can provide you a number, right? So that's out of 900 and it goes from like good to excellent, all this stuff. But it's also really important for them to pull all of your liabilities. And the reason I say this is because here's what happened to me. My name is very popular. There are about 1 million people, men and women, who share my name. And one of them, with the same birthday, also owns a house in a different area. And
Ooh.
somehow, yeah, somehow, her house and her leased BMW was on my credit report. Now, I was pre approved, but they didn't do the full check. So when I went in to do all the paperwork, they said, "We have a problem. We can't give you this money because you're over leveraged."
Oh
Okay,
my.
now panic. Panic is setting in. I have already cut a check as a deposit. That is money I'm not getting back if I don't seal the deal. Okay. So, mad scramble. I mean, I'm very fortunate to work in this space, so I had to call a friend. I tried through the regular channels and I went through a number of what I would call offshore call centers. And 2 days later, I was out of options. So I called a friend to help me sort things out, and it got done, but it was incredibly stressful. It jacked up my legal fees by several $1,000s because it had to be a last minute thing. So you really have to get all your paperwork put together. So make sure you have pulled your full credit history, credit report to make sure that it is accurate because they will use that to determine what your debt to income ratio is. Because their concern when it comes to risk is, can you afford to pay me if I give you this check? And how they do that is, many of you will have heard the stress test. And I just looked it up before this recording. And as of March 2026, Canadian mortgage applicants have to be able to afford the higher of the two. So either a mortgage at 5.25% or their actual negotiated contract rate plus 2%. So
Wow.
whichever is higher. And that's for anyone getting a new uninsured or insured mortgage, as well as those switching lenders. But I think they're a little bit more relaxed now because I think there have been a lot of problems with people being over leveraged,
Mhm.
having again gotten mortgages early on. But the exemptions are, of course, if you're renewing with your existing lender or with a new lender with a different amortization, etc. So, and it's OFC, so it's the Office of the Superintendent of Financial Institutions, has put in to avoid some of the issues that, as you know, plagued the US real estate market and
Yeah.
had that big crash. And so that's why they have this test called the stress test.
Yeah, I just would add one more thing before you go in with your bank and make sure that you have everything in order. Is check your credit rating yourself and make sure that everything is in order and clean up anything that might not be. We actually had a kind of last minute hitch when we were renewing our mortgage. This is absolutely insane. Got a call from our bank manager and said, Doretta, we have a problem. And I'm going, what is it? And it turned out that my husband was having a major battle over a charge with a department store, and it was a department store credit card, and he refused to pay it because they had made an error. He didn't actually owe the money. He couldn't talk to anybody. They were being kind of difficult, so he just refused to pay it. So meanwhile, there was this unpaid bill sitting on his credit score, and I think it was $52. We're really talking point of principle here. And that was actually going to interfere with our mortgage renewal. So I had to like sweep in, pay it, and then fight them and get the money back, which is what I did. So make sure that you check and you clean up anything like that because it can cause you a lot of stress that it doesn't need to.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, it's I still, again, very PTSD'd by this whole situation because it was like, what choice did I have? Like, I had to solve this problem. Otherwise, I had just lost like $50,000.
Yeah.
Um, that was just gone.
Yeah.
And that is in my world not chump change. So yeah, there was a lot of freaking out. I'm not gonna lie. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Let's take
What's
a look
next?
at mortgage basics so that people understand the kind of lingo and the variables of different kinds of mortgages. That will be helpful when we start to talk about things like risks and the kind of things that you need to consider to make sure that we all understand the lingo of the mortgage world. So first of all, explain for us the difference between the term of the mortgage and the amortization period of the mortgage.
So an amortization period is how long you want to take to pay off the mortgage. So generally, it's up to around 25 years. And then from there, you have a term period. So that will be the commitment between you and the financial institution to how long you'll work together. So that brings us to fixed versus variable. So generally, and again, these are all kind of generalities because each institution will be different. But for fixed, you're looking at 3 years or a 5 year term. And of course, for fixed, your bank is committing that your interest rates will be this set number for that many years, whether that's 3 to 5. Now, the longer you sign up for, the higher that interest rate is because it's all about risk, right? Like the bank wants to make money. So they're going to ask you to pay more in case interest rates skyrocket and they have to eat the difference. Variable rates tend to be lower, except in times where they think rates will go down. It's very interesting. Like the bank is always going to try to make as much money as they can from you. That's the reality. But a variable rate generally is 5 years. There are shorter terms, but I would think 5 years is the norm. And so you're committing to be with that banking institution or financial institution for 5 years, and variable moves with prime. So anytime Bank of Canada makes an announcement, if you're on a variable mortgage, you're going to want to tune in because if it goes up, so does your mortgage
Right.
number and the interest you're going to pay on that. If it goes down, celebrations. So it moves, and so they generally will be lower than if you pick a fixed because it's really the bank's risk that they're trying to mitigate.
Okay. What about prepayment options? And this is something that historically is kind of relatively recent in the sense that there were very limited prepayment options. In my day, for example, what it used to be like was that you could pay up to 10% on your anniversary date and you could pay as much as you wanted down on when you were renegotiating your term. So at the end of the, as Lee was saying, the 3 year or the 5 year period, you didn't have the option of paying down anything else other than that. That started to change in this sort of, I looked this up early 2000s, because I remember our last mortgage was a variable rate, completely open mortgage. We could pay any amount down at any time. And it was a time when interest rates were coming down. And that's how we were able to pay it off completely.
I think there's definitely a lot of different terms, and depending on what your terms are, that also will affect that interest rate that they propose. Yeah, and I would say probably in the early 2000s is when they started bringing in anniversary prepayments, where like every year on the day your mortgage started, you were able to put in as much money as you could. So you kind of saved all year and then you dumped a whole bunch of
Yeah.
money. Now I think they're a little bit more flexible where they'll give you total prepayment piece and you can do that any time of the year. So it's kind of open, but you have a limit unless of course you opt for an open mortgage, then you can pay whatever however much you want whenever. But I think generally the standard would be a term of 3 to 5 years, either fixed or variable, and everything you add plays around with that interest number. And then they have a set prepayment that resets on the anniversary or the month of your anniversary of when you started your mortgage.
And actually, maybe you should just explain the difference between principal and interest and where the money is going and why, particularly at the beginning of your homeownership life, your principal doesn't seem to be going down very much.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really tough one for a number of reasons. Principal is the amount you've borrowed from the bank, right? Like that's actually the total. The interest is the amount that you accumulate the longer you hold that debt, right? That's the interest
Mhm.
payments. So it depends a little bit too on the type of payment you've set up. So if you pay monthly, I definitely do not recommend that because there's a difference. Okay, let's say there's 4 weeks in a month and I pay $400 a month and one-time payment versus I pay $100 every week. You actually pay your principal down quicker when you do more payments over a period of time as opposed to one lump sum. Because remember that interest accumulates every day, right? So the faster you make a payment, whether that's $100 versus $400 once a month, makes actually a huge difference. So for me, when friends and family ask me for my opinion, I always suggest what is called an accelerated weekly payment. So that number will change based on the interest if you're on variable. Okay, so it will go up or down depending on if there's a shift in the interest number, and it's weekly. So it's not a huge number every week. So I'm not making like $1,000 payment a week, but rather than doing a lump sum, it's every week. And that actually starts speeding up how much of the principal you pay versus how much you're just paying off the interest.
And what I would suggest is when you are negotiating your mortgage, actually ask that question. They'll do the calculation for you and they will show you the difference between paying monthly, paying biweekly, which is what some people do because it ties
Mm.
into their pay cycle, or
Yep.
paying weekly. And they'll actually show you the difference. And it's literally tens of thousands of dollars of difference or more over the life of the mortgage.
Especially if you're starting out, like your total mortgage is higher. That number will start diminishing over time because obviously you hopefully will owe less and less of the principal. And so
Right.
you'll see that after your first year and subsequent years.
Okay. Let's see. Other mortgage basics terms that you should understand. The posted rate.
So the posted rate is the interest rate that will be public for everyone to see. So they'll say if I'm bank ABC, my variable 5 year rate is this, my fixed rate is that. But that's just what they put on. It's negotiable, and that's important to know.
That's the point. Posted rate is negotiable. But if you look at, say, Rate Hub or whatever, you look on the bank's or financial institution's website, what you're seeing is the posted rate, correct?
Yeah, and I think it's always good to know what your starting point is because it gives you a sense of what's out there. So when you get a rate that is much higher than that, you got to ask, something doesn't smell right. Or if it's a lot lower, then you also need to think about, okay, well, why am I getting a lot lower, right? So it kind of gives you a baseline, which I think is very helpful.
Right. Okay, so why don't we talk a little bit about assessing your mortgage options? Because as Lee said earlier, a lot of people go to their bank and get a mortgage, and they don't particularly shop around, despite the fact that it's the biggest, for most people, it is the biggest purchase they will ever make in their lives. And they don't necessarily sit down with multiple lenders to really assess what's available. And one of the things you have to remember is that rate is not the only variable. Sometimes, as Lee was just saying, you've got to question why an interest rate is that much lower because there is usually a reason, and there will probably be other items, other variables that may be more important to you. So, one of the decisions you're going to have to make, fixed versus variable. And I think Lee just explained that one. Prepayment options.
I mean, that generally, I think it gets built into the mortgages a lot of times now where they offer that, but you want to make sure that if you think you can pay more in a year and want to pay more, especially if you think, I'm on variable, but who knows, interest rates might go up and I want to make sure that I have money to do a large prepayment. Because remember, going back to your principal question earlier, when you make a prepayment, all of that money hits the principal.
Right.
And that's actually a
Exactly.
big deal, right? Because every month or every week, depending on what your pay cycle is, part of that goes to principal, part of that goes to interest. And in the beginning, because your debt is so much higher, most of that money actually goes to pay the interest. And that's what Doretta was getting at earlier. But when you make a prepayment, let's say an extra $5,000 lying around, or I got a bonus or I got a gift, and I put that into my mortgage, then you take your total mortgage and you subtract
Right.
$5,000, right? Like it's a straight payment.
Yep. And what that means is, assuming that you keep your weekly or biweekly or monthly payment the same, more of that is going on the principal because you've reduced the principal by that
Yeah.
much. So the idea is that over time, more and more and more of your money is actually paying down the principal, assuming that you're not reducing your payment, which unfortunately is what some people do. Okay, penalties for breaking the mortgage early. Really important question to ask.
Yes, and some of them can be egregious. So you really need to understand what the penalties are, not because you think, hey, in 2 years, something calamitous is going to happen and I'm going to have to bail on my mortgage. But it is important to know what your exit clause is in case, for whatever reason, you needed to get out of this mortgage, and know how the penalties are calculated. Generally, it's a penalty by month remaining on your mortgage term. So if you are in your third year and you break off that mortgage, they're going to charge you the interest between that and the end of your term. So sometimes it can be very, very steep.
Okay, and then I think another important question to ask is what happens if I miss a payment? Because it can happen.
Yeah, I definitely think if you believe or know that you're going to miss a payment, call your bank first. Don't just miss a payment, because A, that's a big red flag for your credit score and it will go on your credit report. And generally, if you're looking at one payment or two payments, if you call the bank, they're actually not jerks about it because they know stuff happens. And if you've generally been really good, they might just say, no problem, we'll forgive this one. You won't incur penalties. Because sometimes what happens is if, let's say, they take money from an account and the money's not there, they'll add not sufficient funds charges for every time that you miss a payment. And then if it gets really bad, then they'll put a lien on your property so you can't even sell it. And then there's foreclosure. Then it just gets really bad. So I think if you are at a place where you're thinking, I need help, I'm at risk of not paying my mortgage, call your bank first, figure it out, because there's other things they can do. So, for example, if you've been with the bank for a while and you've built up equity, they can perhaps stretch out your amortization number. So, as you pay down your principal, the time it will take to pay off the entire amount gets reduced. So, you can add that back in, and then it actually decreases your monthly payments. So I think there's all sorts of things that you can do, but don't just let the deadline go by and miss the payment. Call your bank or call the mortgage specialist of your bank. Have that discussion. There's different things that they can propose.
Yeah. I think that when you're in the negotiation phase, really what you want to do is just understand what the policies are. Okay. So you've been through this recently. You are in the process of renegotiating now. What's your best advice to folks on negotiation tactics?
I always like to be pleasant. I feel like when you're nice, people respond better. So I like to show up with a positive demeanor and, of course, ask all the right questions and start early. So the first you want to do is to get your pre-approval rate locked in. So they'll give you a amount of time for a certain rate. So it could be like 120 days or so we will guarantee that rate for this amount of time unless maybe rates go down, then we'll give you the better rate. So that's kind of how you lock in and you have that number. Once you do find a property and you're thinking, "Hey, this is within my price range, I like it," then you're gonna wanna look at that rate a little more closely, and again, work with a licensed mortgage broker. They'll also negotiate great incentives for you, so those are all things to keep in mind. And then, of course, go through the list that we've already talked about, like, what are the terms of the different offers? Maybe you want a free pizza party and a moving truck, I don't know. And, of course, figure out, uh all of the terms and conditions that go with that because it is a fairly long commitment and you are buying a property. It's not, $25. It's probably 400,000 to over 1 million or 3. And so you really want to make sure you read the fine print. This is not a scroll to the bottom and sign. This is please understand what you're signing and what you're getting into. And always negotiate different rates. Never just take whichever one you think is the best because sometimes what will happen is you get a best rate from bank A, but you kind of like bank B. So go to bank B and be like, well, bank A gave me this. And especially if it's in writing, that's pretty critical because your chances of getting a better rate in negotiating is higher if you have something written from bank A that says, this is the interest rate, these are the terms, and then bank B will generally match it or they'll beat it because they want your business. And especially if you have good credit rating, you have a great income, a very stable income, perhaps you had a mortgage before and it's been discharged, or you've had revolving credit and always paid your credit cards on time. They want your business because you're low risk, and with a mortgage, it's guaranteed money. And if you don't pay, there's collateral. They'll just take your house and sell it. So mortgage business is very lucrative.
Okay. One thing I've read is that mortgage specialists can have monthly or quarterly quotas, so they can be more flexible at the end of their sales period. I have never done any of this myself, but I've read that can be helpful if you can make that work for you.
Sure. Yeah, okay. I've never heard that, but that could be a pro tip.
Another thing is remember that you're not just negotiating on rate, you can also be negotiating on flexibility, etc. There can be things that work for you that are more important to your life, and you want to keep everything balanced.
Yes, fair.
Okay, so that's negotiating a first mortgage. You're in the process of renegotiating right now, which can also be tough. Most people just renew, accept the first offer. First of all, what are you seeing is the difference between renegotiating and negotiating a mortgage in the first place?
I think there's definitely less paperwork in renegotiating unless you're not doing a straight renewal, you're doing like a refinance. So you want more than what you currently owe, or there's a title change. So perhaps you need to change your mortgage because you're separating from a partner or a spouse. Then there's all sorts of other things that have to happen, like you need a lawyer. So when you buy your first home, you definitely need a lawyer. And so some of those changes on renewal, you're gonna want legal representation and also legal paperwork that has to be done. But if you're doing a straight renewal, so I owe $100,000, $500,000, whatever the case may be, and you just want to continue paying that off, that's a straight renewal. It's more straightforward. There's less processes and tests that they go through because you're already a known commodity, especially to your current lender, but also to other lenders.
Okay. What's your best advice then for renegotiating?
I would say, obviously talk to your current lender first. They should be the easiest to deal with because you have history with them. Make your case. I tried, but they gave me a rate, and like I said, I was like, "Wow, that's a lot higher than I anticipated." And they said, "Well, the best way to do it," and they know that people are lazy, okay? Because I tried to get them to bring it down to a number that I was comfortable with because I had done some online research. They wouldn't budge. So I got on the phone and I called a mortgage broker and I said, "Okay, here's my situation. What are my rates?" And they want you to do that extra due diligence and then to provide them with a rate that's lower than the rate they provided you before they go back to whomever is the overlord of deciding mortgage interest rates. And then they're going to come back with either a competing offer or they'll beat the offer that's on the table. So it's a bit of a game. It's a little bit of a dance. It takes time and an investment to look into it, but I did find it very interesting that when I told them, I said, "Look, I went online and I looked on Rate Hub and these are the rates I'm seeing. This is nowhere near that." And they're like, "Well, you're gonna have to go find another rate and show us." And I'm like, "Really? Wow, that's a tough bargain." But I'm in this business, so I gotta do it. I gotta call around. And so right now I'm in the process of waiting. I'll keep everyone posted.
Okay. So that's a big information dump on mortgages. Hope it was useful. Let's do a quick summary. So, Lee, for people negotiating their first mortgage, top three things.
And a lot of this is based on my personal experience, to be fair. Like, you may not have as a terrible time as I did this first round, but I would say maybe I have more than three. But let's start with number one. Just because you're approved for a large number does not mean you need to use all of it. Seriously, don't do it. Like, do the math first. There's a lot of great calculators. Run through the different scenarios because if you use the number they give you and anything in your life changes, you're up shit's creek. Totally. Okay. Number two, credit report. Please pull it. Having lived through this whole issue of mistaken identity, and also remember, sometimes when you close an account, it isn't always reflected in your report. So you want to clean it up before you actually need to get money because that also factors in to their risk profile and assessment of you from a bank's perspective and will influence your interest rate. Third, always negotiate, always ask for better terms, and keep track of those terms. What are your prepayment? Generally, with online banking, it's really straightforward and it's very clear, but understand what they are and how you can make prepayments. A lot of banks, you can do it automatically through online banking. Some make it really difficult where you actually have to call a mortgage specialist. And they do all that, right? To add friction, as we've talked about on the show. And of course, know what the penalties are if you miss a payment, if you need to break the mortgage early, if you need to switch to another lender, whatever the case may be. Oh, and finally, my fourth one is especially for your first mortgage, get all the freebies. Seriously, ask for them with a mortgage broker. They get paid by the banking institution and they get paid quite a bit of money, especially on large size mortgages. So make sure you negotiate all the free things you can get or the extra money because that will really help with your closing costs.
Okay. And what about for renegotiation? Because people can assume that's a slam dunk. Not necessarily. What would your three key learnings for that be?
Start early so you're not stressed and panicking because your mortgage needs to be renewed after next week. They say a general good rule to follow is around the 3 to 5 month mark because you also benefit from additional savings and what they call early renewal. So make sure you start asking now. Whether or not you renew closer to the date, that's up to you. But the earlier you start, the more time you have to work through a lot of different options. Two, don't take the first offer. Okay, never take the first offer because remember, banking institutions are not your friends. They want your money and they're going to try to make it as hard as possible for you to pay less, but they will remove the friction for you to say yes to whatever they offer you. So don't take the first offer. Don't even buy into them saying, oh, well, renewal will only take 10 minutes. Okay. But if you spend an extra maybe half an hour to an hour, you could be saving thousands of dollars. Depending on the size of the mortgage, hundreds of thousands of dollars over time. When you do get a better rate, always go back to your current lender and show them. So when you get a better rate, don't go, okay, well, I'll just go with these guys because they're giving me a better rate. Go back to your current lender and say, this is what they gave me. Can you do better? And oftentimes they will because they want to keep your business. It's easy money making, especially if you're a for sure thing. Oh, and finally, don't get trapped by more money. Because one of the things they're going to start doing is selling you more things. They'll be like, oh, well, you can refinance. So you can take out some of the equity and get more money. Or you can add other products. No. If you don't need this debt, just be like, we're good. Fine. I just need to renew this. Thank you.
Okay, that is some great advice. And that's all for today from us. So if you have questions about mortgages or you'd like to share your thoughts and experience, why don't you drop us a line at notjustmoneypodcast@gmail.com. And a reminder for everyone, next week is Easter for those of you who celebrate, and we will be off. So we will be back again in 2 weeks.
Good talk. You've been listening to Not Just Money with Doretta and Lee. Click on the show's description for links to resources related to today's conversation. Our aim is to share sources that provide objective information that can help you make informed financial decisions. Please rate and review our show. If you'd like to get in touch with us, email us at notjustmoneypodcast@gmail.com. If you'd like to be featured on the show, you can send us your questions and comments by a written email, audio file, or video file. Please include your name and city. This show is produced and edited by Lee, with original music by Leo Zhang cello and artwork by John Tu. Now for some legalese. Please note that the views expressed by our hosts and guests are theirs alone and should not be viewed as financial advice. This podcast is intended to be entertainment and educational in nature. Please seek additional professional support or information before acting on any podcast information. As always, good talk.